Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar for the Unit 5 of the Science and Religion course at Wilmette Institute, 2018. And today our presenter will be Robert Sarracino, one of the faculty members, and he'll be offering a talk on science and the scientific method. Robert?
Thank you, Roger, and welcome everyone to this webinar on science and the scientific method. I'll go through the material probably in about 20 to 30 minutes. It'll take me about that long. And hopefully it will generate ideas in your mind and help spur discussion for the forums later. So it will be on science and the scientific method. And first we'll have an introduction on what science is, what religion is, and the Baha'i concept, brief introduction. We'll talk about science's strengths and limitations. We'll give an outline of the scientific method, which will be a bit more sophisticated than the kind of outline that, let's say, might be presented to a high school student. We'll talk about science's, what Gouch has called science's 4 bold claims. And then finally, we'll look at the interesting relationship between the individual scientist and the scientific community, which is this relationship is very important to the pursuit and the progress of science. What is the scientific method, and how is the Baha'i Faith itself scientific in its method? In this unit, we will examine the scientific method in more detail than in the first 2 units, and later in the course, we will explore the concept of the Baha'i Faith itself being scientific in its method. So, Baha'is believe in the harmony of science and religion, and to get to the roots of this concept, we have to specifically what the Baha'i writings say, or what they're dealing with, is religion specifically as understood in the writings of Baha'u'llah, and science as the mainstream view of science, that is, science as scientists practice and understand it. Some people have said, well, I believe in the harmony of science and religion. When you talk to them in detail, they get to define science and they get to define religion. In that case, then, the harmony is simply a matter of coherence of their beliefs. But Baha'is believe in the harmony of science as scientists practice it, as it is viewed in the mainstream, and religion as Baha'is conceive religion, as Baha'u'llah conceives religion. Source readings. For religion, probably the greatest single source of the Baha'i concept of religion is contained in World Order of Baha'u'llah. And science, we will draw heavily on the 2 books, Scientific Method and Practice and Scientific Method in Brief by Hugh Gouch. Another very interesting exposition of scientific method is Richard Feynman's Character of Physical Law. And in this presentation, we'll follow the ideas of Hugh Gouch. They are representative of a mainstream view of science in the scientific community. They're influenced by the philosopher Thomas Reid, founder of the Scottish School of Common Sense. Gouch's 2 books are a distillation of AAAS position papers and years of teaching courses on the scientific method at Cornell. And it should be noted that, of course, not all practicing scientists would agree with all the points made by Gouch. Science's great strength is that the scientific method, if applied faithfully, will over time inevitably lead to discovery and the truth. Science might go down the wrong path from time to time, but if the scientific method is pursued faithfully, eventually it will lead to the truth. That's its great strength. What about science's limitations? Well, the American Association for the Advancement of Science has said that science is one of the liberal arts. Implicit in that statement is that there are truths expressed through each of the liberal arts which cannot be expressed through another. So, for instance, there are truths expressed in music, drama, literature, the visual arts, which science cannot discover or express, just as science discovers aspects of reality which lie outside of the other liberal arts. To give an example from my own personal view experience, when I hear Dvorak's Ninth Symphony from the New World, it tells me something about America and the American character which nothing else has been able to tell me. When I listen to the symphony, I'm reminded of the commandment of the Bab, issue forth from your cities, O peoples of the West, and aid God. And I'm reminded of the injunction of Baha'u'llah to the rulers of America, bind ye the broken with the hands of justice, and crush the oppressor who flourisheth with the rod of the commandments of your Lord. These two quotes I've gained greater insight into these quotes by listening to Dvorak's Ninth Symphony. And this is an aspect of reality which is outside and complementary to science. So the history of the scientific method. How did this marvelous method, the scientific method, come into being? Who developed it? It has a long history spanning millennia. In the words of Gauch, the most productive shift in the history of the philosophy of science was brought about by the scholastics of the 12th and 13th centuries. Robert Grosseteste, William of Ockham, William of Vulverin, Albertus Magnus, Thomas Aquinas, Roger Bacon, John Duns Scotus, among the most notable. This is the method that they developed, conceived and developed, was the method applied by Galileo and Newton. And that method has been further refined and continues to be applied today, essentially in the way that their groundbreaking discovery or invention created it. And Gauch paraphrases the scholastics as asking themselves this question: what human-sized and public method can provide scientists with truth about the physical world? How can we identify that true knowledge which any intelligent person could have merely by exercising his or her natural intellectual capabilities? So Gauch says this is the question that the scholastics asked, and what came out of that question was the scientific method. It rests on three pillars: presuppositions, evidence, logic. Science begins with a set of essential presuppositions, and these are relatively simple and easy to state, and to some people they're obvious. The physical world is real. The input from our senses and from extensions of our senses are generally sound, and this input reveals to us the reality of the physical world. And human minds are capable of making sense of this reality. Now, as Gauch points out, and as ordinary, if you were to think about it, you would realize there is no way to prove that these beliefs are true. On the other hand, there is no way to disprove them. Hence, these presuppositions are based on faith. And this is something that I wrote in my paper, The Seven Values in the Scientific Method. I said the scientific method begins with an act of faith. Faith that the universe is rational. Faith on the part of the scientist that he can indeed make sense out of the universe. Faith that the truths of the universe can be investigated by the technological means at hand, can be grasped by the mind of man, and brought into order within the systems, mathematical and other, which human logic has created. So this act of faith, and these beliefs are not things which can be proven or disproven, hence they're accepted on the basis of faith. The presuppositions of science are the same as the presuppositions of common sense. Common sense assumes, for instance, that our family, our friends are real people, not figments of our imagination. Common sense tells us that if, while crossing a road, we see a car bearing down on us and hear the sound of its engine, then there really is a car bearing down on us, and we would be harmed if we don't get out of the way. The conclusions and discoveries of science go far beyond the conclusions and discoveries of common sense, but both rest in the same small set of presuppositions. And Gauch points out that virtually all religions have fundamental belief systems which accept the presuppositions of science. Hence, historically, followers of all religions have made contributions to scientific knowledge. The notion of presupposition and science's presuppositions are amply supported and confirmed in the writings of Baha'u'llah. Nature is God's will and is its expression in and through the contingent world. And this remarkable statement of Baha'u'llah: out of the wastes of nothingness, with the play of my command, I made thee to appear, and have ordained for thy training every atom in existence and the essence of all created things. This obviously supports the presuppositions of science. Secondly, evidence. We won't spend much time on this because it's more or less obvious. The scientist studies nature. More accurately, the scientist questions reality. This questioning takes the form of selected observation, controlled experimentation, and mathematical analysis. And thirdly, logic. Science uses both inductive and deductive logic in the creation of models, hypotheses, principles, laws, theories, which are developed to make sense out of data created from observation and experimentation. Science is not just the accumulation of facts. That is, we conduct an experiment, make observations, we get facts, a whole bunch of data and facts. But science uses logic to make sense out of these facts. Science relies heavily on mathematics, which involves long, complicated logical chains. And in the 20th century especially, science has relied increasingly heavily on probability, which is a deductive tool, and statistics, which is an inductive logical tool. Scientific experimentation and discovery requires great intuition and creativity, but in order for scientific truth to be established, it must conform to logic. The next slide bears careful study. And this diagram, which was posted at the head of the unit, gives an overview of the scientific method, a more sophisticated overview than the caricature which is often presented, say, in high school to high school students. So this cloud represents nature. Nature is real, the reality of nature. We observe nature, we conduct experiments, and the information we get is necessarily noisy. That is, there are uncertainties in our measurements, and the data is necessarily incomplete. And so this mirror with the little squiggly line represents that the pure data which exists in nature is observed by us as combination of signal and noise. From this data, we use the process of induction to develop hypotheses. The hypothesis is further tested by the design of more experiments. At the same time, we use deductive logic to create consequences of the hypothesis. And the new data that we get from new experiments, plus the consequences, are then both sifted in a new inductive phase in which we may modify the hypothesis, or we might confirm it as is, or we might abandon it altogether. So this is a more sophisticated view of the scientific method. Gouch says that science makes four bold claims. It makes claims of truth, of rationality, objectivity, and realism. And these same four claims, as we will show in later units, can be made for the Baha'i Faith and its apprehension of spiritual reality. Truth relies on what Aristotle formulated and as the correspondence theory of truth. It might sound like a bit of nonsense, but it's actually the essence of what truth means in the scientific sense. Aristotle said, to say of what is that it is, or to say of what is not that it is not, is true. Science is about perceiving what is and telling the truth, regardless of what others might perceive or what they may wish to say or to hear about what has been perceived. There are other theories of truth, and I mention them just as a way of contrast. The coherence theory of truth says that a series of statements is true if it is coherent, that is, if it is logically consistent. Something very prevalent throughout history and still in the modern world is the pragmatic theory of truth, that is, truth is what works. Implicitly, advertising implicitly adopts this theory of truth. If it results in better sales, it's true. It doesn't matter what you tell them. If they buy it, then it's true. This vacuum cleaner is the best vacuum cleaner ever that has ever been invented, And if that statement results in increased sales of the vacuum cleaner, then the statement is justified according to the pragmatic theory of truth. If a politician tells you a particular lie and he gets elected because of that, then he has followed the pragmatic theory of truth. Well, it worked, didn't it? I got elected. And so that's the pragmatic theory of truth. Although other concepts of truth do have limited validity, science rests firmly on Aristotle's correspondence theory. And so science is about the truth as connected to reality. And this is the same in the Baha'i Faith. The Baha'i Faith is about truth, and Baha'is are to be truth tellers. Truthfulness is the foundation of all the virtues of the world of humanity. Without truthfulness, progress and success and all of the worlds of God are impossible for a soul. When this holy attribute is established in man, all the divine qualities will also become realized. So this Baha'i conception of truth corresponds with the scientific conception of truth. Rationality. Rationality is good reasoning. The rationality of science is obvious. Science relies on deductive and inductive reasoning, relies on mathematics. It relies on deductive and inductive tools of probability and statistics. And in science, reason has a double office. Reason regulates belief, and reason is a guide to action. So that belief and action, the concept of rationality, incorporates belief and action. Does that sound familiar? It should. Rationality. The guardian growth of the hidden words were a dynamic spiritual leaven cast into the life of the world for the reorientation of the minds of men. So this aspect of rationality is central to the Baha'i Faith. In one of his talks on America, Abdu'l-Baha stated, "We must arise to service in the world of morality, for human morals are in need of readjustment. We must also render service to the world of intellectuality, in order that the minds of men may increase in power and become keener in perception, assisting the intellect of man to attain its supremacy so that the ideal virtues may appear." And another statement from the Baha'i writings which supports the notion of rationality: "The virtues of humanity are many, but science is the most noble of them all." Objectivity. In science, there are two aspects to objectivity. Firstly, truth is about objects, not about the people who studied those objects. That is, table salt is sodium chloride. It doesn't matter if the person who says that comes from a Eurocentric background. Newton's laws of motion aren't about Newton, they're about the manner in which objects in the physical world move. And secondly, truth is, in the words of Gauch, achievable by the exercise of ordinary endowments common to all humans. So objectivity has these two aspects. Truth is about objects, and secondly, truth is achievable by the exercise of ordinary endowments common to all humans. Realism. Realism, as regards the physical world, is the philosophical theory that both human thoughts and independent objects exist, and that human endowments render the physical world substantially intelligible and reliably known. Scientific realism embodies the claim that the scientific method provides rational access to physical reality. And Abdu'l-Baha upholds the notion of scientific realism. I'll read this longish statement of his. "The sophists hold that all existence is illusory, indeed that each and every being is an absolute illusion that has no existence whatsoever. In other words, that the existence of created things is like a mirage, or like the reflection of an image in water or in a mirror, which is merely an appearance devoid of any basis, foundation, or ascertainable reality." And Abdu'l-Baha then goes on to say, "This notion is false. For although the existence of things is an illusion compared to the existence of God, Yet in the contingent world, it is established, proven, and undeniable. And then he gives examples of what it means. So he says that the mineral is non-existent compared to the animal or compared to man, but in its own realm, its own sphere, it is absolutely existent. We are non-existent relative to God, but in our own realm, we are existent. And science deals with the study of phenomena on the level of that phenomena. So physics deals with the study of the physical world on the level of the physical world. And so scientific realism is confirmed in this in Abdu'l-Baha's statements. Nature and scientific truth, in a sense, I've used this word covenant, which is very much a Baha'i concept, at least as Baha'is use it, it's a Baha'i concept. What ensures that the scientific method over time stays on track? That is, if science discovers truth or discovers something that it thinks is true, what will ensure that this method stays on track? Richard Feynman made the statement, if it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. That's all there is to it. Nature is always with us, and science is and must be firmly rooted in nature. This is an essential presupposition. In a sense, I would like to say, there's a covenant between nature and the scientist. That is, the scientist says to nature, I will always be faithful to you, and I will always prefer your truth to my own imagination. And nature says, if you do, I will always reveal myself to you and guide you to the truth. In the words of Baha'u'llah, nature is God's will and is its expression in and through the contingent world. Look at the world and ponder a while upon it. It unveileth the book of its own self before thine eyes, and revealeth that which the pen of thy Lord, the fashioner, the all-informed, hath inscribed therein. It will acquaint thee with that which is within it and upon it. And so, if we want to think in these terms, there is, in a sense, as a covenant between man and nature. And science implicitly follows that covenant. Religion, of course, or the Baha'i Faith also explicitly follows that covenant. Finally, I'd like to talk about the individual and the community, because in science there are basically two entities, and both entities are extremely important for the pursuit of science. There's the scientific community, and then there's the researcher or the research team. And the scientific endeavor requires a balance between these two. Inspiration and discovery come from the individual researcher or research team. However, evaluation and acceptance, and to some extent direction, come from the scientific community. And these two, the researcher and the community, interact in a beneficial, subtle and beneficial ways. In general, it's easier to evaluate discovery than it is to make discovery. But scientific work must be evaluated and confirmed. One needs experts who know the existing material or experimental methods thoroughly, or can reproduce experimental results or detailed calculations. Hence, science has set up an elaborate system involving peer-reviewed journals, conferences, societies, associations, multi-leveled systems of evaluation, and so forth. The individual scientist has the fundamental duty to learn his craft to perfection, to strive to perceive reality, and to see and tell the truth. And no one, no institution can absolve him or her from this fundamental responsibility. In the words of Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah writes, "The best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away from therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglect it not that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be." Fundamentally, the scientific research must, in his work or her work, embody this concept of justice. He must manifest justice of this level of justice that Baha'u'llah talks about. One thing most scientists will attest to is the differences of opinion, honestly expressed, contribute to the advancement of science. Wrangling, however, disunity over those differences of opinion retards the progress of science. And I'd like to read an example from Richard Feynman. Feynman talked about a consultation that he was part of when he was a young, I think he was a grad student at the time. It must have been, perhaps he was a grad student at that time, but when he was younger, before he had his PhD. And he says this, he says, one of the first interesting experiences I had in this project at Princeton was meeting great men. I'd never met very many great men before, but there was an evaluation committee that had to try to help us along and help us ultimately decide which way we were going to separate the uranium. This committee had men like Compton and Tolman and Smith and Urey and Rabbi and Oppenheimer on it. I would sit in because I understood the theory of how our process of separating isotopes worked. And so they'd ask me questions and talk about it. In these discussions, one man would make a point. Then Compton, for example, would explain a different point of view. He would say, it should be this way. And he was perfectly right. Another guy would say, well, maybe, but there's this other possibility we have to consider against it. So everybody is disagreeing all around the table. I'm surprised and disturbed that Compton doesn't repeat and emphasize his point. Finally, at the end, Tolman, who's the chairman, would say, well, having heard all these arguments, I guess it's true that Compton's argument is the best of all, and now we have to go ahead. It was such a shock to me to see that a committee of men could present a whole lot of ideas, each one thinking of a new facet, or remembering what the other fellow said, so that at the end, the decision is made as to which idea was the best, summing it all up, without having to say it 3 times. And finally concludes, these were very great men indeed. Does this sound familiar? Well, it sounds like familiar in the sense of that's what a Baha'i consultation should be like, this sort of thing. The principle of consultation, which constitutes one of the basic laws of the administration, should be applied to all Baha'i activities which affect the collective interests of the faith. For it is through cooperation and continual exchange of thoughts and views that the cause can best safeguard and foster its interests. Individual initiative, personal ability, and resourcefulness, though indispensable, are unless supported and enriched by the collective experiences and wisdom of the group, utterly incapable of achieving such a tremendous task. This dynamic between the individual and the community exists in the Baha'i Faith as well as in the scientific community. Individual initiative and resourcefulness is crucial to the maintenance and the propagation of the faith, indispensable. But this individual initiative must be supported and enriched by the collective experiences and wisdom of the group. The Guardian once made a statement. He said, I can make the plans. He says, but I can't carry out the plans. I can give direction to the Baha'i community. But unless the individual believer arises to put those plans into practice, I am powerless. The head of the faith itself is powerless if the individual believer does not arise. So this intricate connection, this marvelous connection between the individual and the community, which is such an important feature of science, is also a vital feature in the Baha'i faith. And maybe I should put it the other way around. This interaction, which is so vital to the faith, is also vital to the scientific community. Without the community, without the evaluation of the community in science, then we'd have 1,000 different scientists, each one coming up with his own theory, and no progress at all being made. Consultation is also a means by which the view of one sagacious person can be recognized and adopted by an entire community. So it's fascinating to me that consultation has this dual power. On the one hand, we use consultation to draw on the power of the group. On the other hand, as Abdu'l-Baha has said, 1,000 people may hold to one view and be mistaken, whereas one sagacious person may be right. Consultation is a means whereby the view of this one sagacious person will rise to the fore, will rise to the top. And this is true in science as well. If you think about the great revolutions in science, inevitably these revolutions are brought about by, usually often by one single person or a small group of people. And the type of consultation in which the scientific community engages, i.e. peer-reviewed journals, talks at conferences, discussions, and so on, the type of consultation that the Baha'i community, that the scientific community has, enables the view of the great creator, the great scientist, to rise to the top. So science and the Baha'i Faith both have this remarkable feature. In summary, the scientific method is the most powerful method yet devised by the hand of man for discovering truth. And the Baha'i writings validate the presuppositions and claims of science: truth, rationality, objectivity, and realism. And then I would like to close with this quote from The Guardian. He talks about a world society in which science and religion, the two most potent forces in human life, will be reconciled, will cooperate, and will harmoniously develop. So thank you very much. And I hope this generates a healthy discussion in the forums. And I hope that the course continues to be beneficial and instructive and enjoyable and exciting for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
So much. Thank you, Rob. That was great. Wow.
Nikki, do you have any comments or questions that you'd like to bring forward?
It's just, I never thought of consultation in that way, about the, it being something that we really do in science, or that, well, scientists would do well to do probably more of that still.
They would.
I gathered that what happened with Feynman was not very, it's not passé. In other words, that was particularly special.
Yes, yeah. It isn't the rule. It's the ideal. It does happen, but it isn't the scientists would do well to read that and make an effort to follow it more closely, or more faithfully. That's right.
Yes. So really, you see there where the two things are kind of like the wings of the bird kind of thing.
Yeah.
Science would do well to have more of that consultation and the spirit of investigating the truth, which we find in the faith. And the faith would also do well to, I know the Wilmette Institute wants to encourage people to study and to learn and to become excellent in their field and to apply, whatever knowledge they have in their own field, knowledge of the faith and its principles.
Yeah.
And one of those is, of course, science and religion.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So.
And I was struck when you talk about the statement that the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, declares science to be one of the liberal arts.
Yes.
Yeah, I still don't get it.
Well, I think it's a very significant claim, and it deserves a lot of consideration. But the key thing that you brought out in your slide was that each of the liberal arts can express some truths that cannot be expressed through another.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to turn that for a second to asking you a question about the limitations of the scientific method. Do you think that implies that there are things about human nature that science will never be able to address?
That's a really good question. Well, okay, science. You mean the application of the scientific method?
Yes.
Inherently, I would think so. The thing is that we can use this method to investigate revelation. So, but it does have limitations.
So it's a
How
good
does an
question.
artist create?
And maybe it's enough just to say, yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, it's really a good question. Yeah.
And we don't have a full answer yet.
Yeah. So, for instance, you know, there's a story told about Robert Frost, the poet Robert Frost. You know, he was at a party, and this cavalry officer, this is in the 30s. You know, they still had cavalry in the 30s in the American Army. Cavalry officer said, "How do you write a poem?" And Robert Frost says, "Well, first something has to happen to you." The guy looked blank, and Frost says, "Let me rephrase that. You get an idea. Then you ride it like a horse until you have a poem." In other words, there can be a system to art which the individual artist can use, but it doesn't have to be.
Right.
You know?
Something has to
Like
happen.
Michelangelo, for instance, would look at a block of marble and see a shape inside it. And so his job was to take out all the stuff to release the shape. Well, that's not a rational process. It's an incredible, intuitive process, you know. Like he looks at a huge block, there is David, you know, the statue of David. He just has to release David from this encasing block, you know. So that's what he would do. I mean,
Well, I really appreciate the time and care. I know you put a lot of effort into distilling this in such a big topic in such a short time. I really appreciate the care you've taken, and I think this will provoke some discussion in the discussion forums. And this recording can be used again and again.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
I'm going to unshare this right now.
Okay.
There we go. So we go back to our.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're drawing this to a close for today, and after I figure out I have the time, I'll make it into a video and upload it. Nikki, I'd like to consult with you a little bit about exactly the process you want me to use, because otherwise I'll just do it on my own system, etc. But you may have some Wilmette Institute approved procedures. So
okay, you can.
And we're having a regular meeting tomorrow. Is that right?
yes.
Okay. At it's.
I'm going to stop the recording. I'm stopping the recording.